Heroes of Versailles, and this happens to be a very historical shoujo series. Now, even though this is a historical show, not everything about it is 100% accurate, since most of the characters are fictional with a few exceptions, such as Marie Antoinette. And also one of the biggest parts about this show being very historical happens to be the setting, and that happens to be France during the French Revolution. So now let's talk a bit about the story. So it begins with the main character's father, General Jarges, and he happened to have 6 kids and they all happened to be girls. But he really wanted to have a son so then he can raise him to be a royal guard for the future. But instead of having another child and trying again, he wanted to take his youngest daughter and named her Oscar. And he raises her like a boy, like teaching her things like fencing, horsemanship, all that kind of stuff. And as time goes by, she ends up becoming the commander of the Royal Guard, which is responsible for the safety of Marie Antoinette, since there are many situations where people are either trying to capture her or trying to assassinate her. And even though he is not technically a part of the Royal Guards, Oscar's best friend Andre likes to join sides her, and usually they like to practice sword fighting with each other. So while this story may seem pretty basic, the one thing I didn't get a chance to explain yet here is that there is a whole lot of political stuff in this one. And I'll be honest, I'm not a huge fan of political stuff within anime, even though I was expecting to see that kind of stuff within this show, but I will admit, I think they did a good job keeping it interesting. Even if the beginning part is a little bit slow, but it's nothing too major, considering that I watched the entire thing and I'm also here with some positive feedback. But probably one of the best parts about this story happens to be the characters. They're very well written, very well developed, and the interactions with each other are always great. Like Oscar and Andre have some very interesting scenes, and the way how they portrayed the historical characters also is very interesting as well. So that really does make up for it, and of course the action scenes are pretty great as well. So there's not a whole lot else I can really say about the story without getting into spoiler territory, but I think it does have some pretty good variety here. I mean, you got action, you got romance, you got drama, you got historical stuff and some political stuff, and of course great characterization. So now let's move on to other stuff like the animation. And I have to say, this might actually be the nicest looking anime I've ever seen that came out in the 70s. So as to be expected from that, the animation flows very smoothly, the art style is really awesome and definitely suits it very well. So really, I don't have any complaints whatsoever when it comes to animation. Now I'm sure there might be like some little things that couldn't be perfect, but hey, whatever, with just this is fucking good looking. So as I already said, so far this might actually be the nicest looking anime that I've ever seen that come out in the late 70s or just the 70s in general. And now, as for the music, I think it's really well done. So all the songs suit the show and suit the scenes very well. So of course you're not going to hear any like techno songs or anything like that in this show. But the music really does suit the time period that it's in, which is, you know, very appropriate. And personally, I like it quite a bit. And as for the opening theme song, I like it quite a bit. Not only does it have a good rhythm to it, but I also really love the violin piece in it. And as I said about the music in the show, it definitely does have that feel as well. So there's nothing to complain about here. And speaking of music, they actually have quite a few musicals for this series, which is quite interesting. Now, before I start talking about the score, I just want to say one thing here is that, wow, this review is actually really short today. And a part of the reason why I kept this one a bit short mainly has to do with the plot, where yes, it is very easy to understand and very simple. I did not want to bore you guys too much with talking about a whole bunch of political stuff, but that's not to say that this show is boring, because I do think it does have a pretty good enough balance. So really, I just didn't really feel like explaining it all, but I think you got the basic of what this show is all about. So anyways, now we'll start talking about the score. So if I were to rate this one, I think I'm gonna give it a 9 out of 10. So yes, this is actually a pretty damn good show. And as I said just a moment ago, it has a very good balance, so it doesn't bog you down too much on the political stuff, which is really my only complaint. But I'm not gonna fault the anime too much on that. I think that just has to do with me with just not giving a shit with that kind of content. But everything else about it is fucking great, especially the characterization and the animation. Those two are easily the best part about this. And if you really like shoujo, then this is definitely a must. Also, one thing I forgot to mention here is that the voice acting in this show. Well, there's nothing much I can really comment on since this one was never adapted into English, but it was adapted into many other different languages. In fact, the show over in some European countries is actually known as Lady Oscar, interesting enough. So yeah, that was just something I forgot to mention earlier, but anyways, I really do think this is a really good show. And I'm pretty glad that a friend of mine actually told me about this one. If it wasn't for them, I probably never would have heard about this one. Also, before I end it, I just have some random shit thing that they told me about with this show is that they said the show was like Griffith from Berserk got his own show, but he was a chick, and of course minus the whole like dark and gritty atmosphere of it. And thinking about it now, well, I can kinda see that. Now sure, it is a little bit over the top and ridiculous to think of it that way, but I definitely would not call that a downgrade since I do think this show is just as good as Berserk since I gave both of those shows a 9 out of 10. So meaning, yes, it's fucking good.